Thanks everybody for coming tonight. I'm gonna introduce Joshua in a second when he rejoins us. Joshua Ray Stevens is a classically trained graphic designer who received his BFA at the University of Georgia, and in 2003, correct me if I'm wrong, earned an MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art. I had to do the math. More importantly, Joshua is an author and comic book artist. Joshua is best known for his forays into fantasy, fiction, and illustration through his diverse publishing, including his vibrant Instagram account. His Instagram account, populated with countless time-lapse videos of his drawing, is a window into his relentless studio practice. Joshua's tireless efforts to push his work into ever more powerful terrain reached new heights with the late 2018 release of Severed Limbs. Severed Limbs is the culmination of 10 years of drawing and thinking. Severed Limbs is a book about a prophet or a madman, depending on your perspective, who suffers a serious injury from a divine cat and sets out for restitution. Severed Limbs is a testament to Joshua's vision and dedication to his craft. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, Ted Haggard, and someone named Lonnie Frisbee, and Jimmy Swaggart are all fundamentalist preachers cut from the cloth of the Southern spiritualist tradition and the Great Awakening. In this room tonight, seated in this very audience, we find many competing definitions of what it means to be an artist or a designer. One of the oldest, and dare I say, most relevant, positions the artist as they who asks penetrating questions about the fundamental nature of human existence. Not unlike Jim and Tammy Faye Baker or Jimmy Swaggart, throughout history we find powerful examples of the artist as a kind of secular clergy, an outsider daring to rethink fundamental issues of human existence. The artist's work serves as the laboratory for these experiments. At some point early in Joshua's graphic novel, Severed Limbs, the author questions one of the three legs that lie at the core of modern religious orthodoxy. The author questions the notion that the transcendent, that is, God, is omniscient, all-knowing. The author questions the fundamental idea that God possesses the capacity to have limitless understanding and knowledge. This simple idea, I believe, positions Joshua as a kind of heretic. To my mind, while Joshua's work is cut from the same cloth and was born of the same great Southern traditions as Jim and Tammy Faye Baker or Jimmy Swaggart, Joshua's heresy bears more in common with the heresy of John the Baptist or the prophet Isaiah, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, than to the moral bankruptcy of the disgraced Southern preacher. So it's my belief that Joshua's program, his life's work, while at this point in comic book form, seeks nothing less than to remind humanity of its long-forgotten divinity. And like the prophet Friedrich Nietzsche, his work is deeply concerned with the problem of overcoming nihilism. And finally, it's my belief that Joshua stands firmly among the most intelligent artists, designers, and educators that I know. So it's my great honor to have Joshua and his family here with us today. So please join me in welcoming Joshua Ray Stevens.
Welcome to the mythosphere. The mythosphere is the no place and the every place, where our souls are truly at home. It is the domain of drama, the realm where spirit and soul wrestle with reality, where all is everywhere and everywhere is all, where all time is now and forever, where today Fred Blitzkrieg is having a really bad day. Okay, so it is August 2006. My then girlfriend and now wife were living in Brooklyn together, and I was lying in bed one morning, just breathing, and a vision appeared to me. In me, maybe. I'm not sure how to describe that, but it was in black and white, and it looked like an animation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Fleischer Studio, but they did Betty Boop and Popeye, but it looked like that. It was like this, looked like an old black and white animation, which is really rare for me because generally my dreams are just like life, right? Color and three-dimensional. So this vision, as I remember it, went something like this. There was a man standing near the forest, and he was shouting something, like a street preacher or something like that, and there were some people kind of standing around watching him. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a giant cat came and bit his leg off and ran off into the woods. And so this man is lying there with blood gushing out of his leg, and he starts yelling something at the sky. There were no words in this vision, but he starts yelling something. I guess my understanding was that he was yelling something at God or his God. And so the God sent a lightning bolt and cauterized the wound, and he immediately crawled himself to a tree, ripped off a branch, and fashioned a crutch, and then went chasing the cat into the woods. And after going through the woods, he came to the edge, and there was a river with a little island and a tower at the top, right? And he looks out, and he sees this sea of wolves that are fighting over his leg, and the cat that bit his leg off is wrapped around the tower, watching as if the wolves are kind of like its minions or something. And he sees this, and he reaches out, and he grabs his own leg by the ankle, and dives into the wolves and beats them back with his own leg. And when he's fought them off, the cat creature, they lock eyes, they look at each other really kind of tensely, right? And the cat creature starts leaning down as if he's about to bite something, and he bites his own leg off and drops it in front of the man, who then attaches it to his severed leg, and that's basically the end of the vision. Okay, so that's how I remember it. It was really strong, like very clear, and I thought, well,
must mean something. I don't know what this means, but it means something. And I had never had a kind of vision like that. So I immediately went and wrote it down. And I finished the book over 10 years later, because this vision came in 2006. And I went back and was reading the. This is the original note for me not to forget it. I mean, I knew I was not going to forget it, but I wanted to write down the details so that I would have them, because at this time I was working on another book that I was more focused on. So I wanted this to be there because I knew I needed to make this in some fashion. I wasn't sure what. But I went and reread it recently and discovered that my memory of the vision is actually quite off. The man was not preaching in the actual vision, at least as I wrote it down. He was just walking with his dog, and the cat didn't just come out. I don't know if you guys can read this or not, but the cat didn't come out. For some reason his leg burst into flame, but this didn't end up in the book. And I tell you this partly because part of what I'm wanting to talk about is the process of making something, right, and following through with something over a span of time, clinging to a certain kind of idea, and then also being able to go back and see how it's changed over time. Because even in this is the first sketch I did of the main character. His name is Friedrich Blitzkrieg, and he's visually he looks like me, but he's visually based on actually a photo of Friedrich Nietzsche. And after I had the vision and I had been thinking about it for a while, I was, my ideas and thoughts on it were developing. So even here, I've already started revising my own. This is revisionist history already, right? Even this is January of '07, so about 6 months-ish later, right? And already I have in my mind that this character was prophesying outside the city. So I've already changed my own vision. And then this is a sketch from later where this is the first place where I kind of envisioned him fully. I had drawn him in several different ways, and I just arrived upon this absurd, tweed-legged, giant boots, Victorian superhero, I guess. But at this point, once I had kind of figured out what he should look like, I kind of set this aside because, as I said, I was working on another book. So during this time, my other thing was a book called The Moth or the Flame, which I finished in late 2007 and self-published in 2008. This was the poster for the release party that we had at a really awesome store called Desert Island in Brooklyn. If you guys are ever in that area, you should definitely go check it out. There's a lot of really cool, weird stuff in there. So at the same time, Mary and I were planning our wedding. So this is the invitation that I designed for the wedding, which was a really nice little package. This came rolled up with a little wax seal and a black ribbon around it, which obviously made mailing it out quite expensive, but it was a screen-printed poster. I thought we both thought it was pretty nice. So anyway, when we were trying to figure out where to get married, we were in a plane, actually, and there was a storm and a lot of turbulence, and we were talking about a bunch of different things. And we started talking about Cranbrook, and suddenly we thought, that's where we should get married. So we got married right up there, above us. And now we go into the woods. So I really dove into focusing on this book around late 2008. I had finished The Moth or the Flame, and this was my next big project. And it went through a lot of revisions that I'm not going to show, but these are the finished versions. But so I'm going to do a little dramatic reading for you here. So he says, "Where'd he go?" "What? Where did you go?" "We went for first aid." And then Fred's in the woods, and he gets sucked into, even though he just got his leg bitten off, he gets sucked into the beauty of nature, right? The orchestral sounds of nature, and he's seduced by this butterfly floating through the trees. And then, "Wake up, fool! Nature is no orchestra." "What?" "I said nature is no orchestra. She is constant discord. Be seduced by romantic notions of phenomenal harmony at your peril. It is the obscure, the esoteric, the backdoor harmonies that raise mountains and topple nations." Fusus scriptus thae fiei. Did you see a giant cat go by with a leg in its mouth? That way. Right. Well, normally I'd love to debate the nature of nature with a divine being such as yourself, but that was my leg. Oh, cool. Thank you. I suggest you listen again. As Fred continued, he tried to concentrate on Fitzgerald's argument, but he could only see his surrounds as a wondrous and joyous orchestration of living energy. The few moments in which he could focus on the opposing view, he became blindingly aware of the fantastic pain his body was enduring. What does it say about him, he wondered, that he's even having these thoughts at a time like this? Beep, 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 beep. We interrupt this broadcast for a transmission from outer space. So, considering the state of the world, political strife, global war, environmental catastrophe, political corruption, mass media consolidation, overconsumption, etc., not to mention the technological developments that have obsoleted them, why would you make a book, you ask? A commercially suicidal, esoteric fantasy comic, no less. Boom!
Fantasy is trying to move to that truth, which is beyond truth. Fantasy goes beyond proof into possibility.
So, I don't know if it was clear at first, the first time she says fantasy is moving to that truth, which is beyond proof, right? And then she says, and then the next time she says proof, not truth, right?
Well, the role of art is transcendence. It's about dealing with, what we call the non-rational forces in human life, those forces that are absolutely essential to being whole as a human being, but are not quantifiable, not empirically measurable. Grief, beauty, the struggle with our own mortality, the search for meaning, love. When Freud said he could write about sex, he could never write about love. And that's only going to come through through art. I mean, I don't think it's accidental that the origins of all religion were always fused with art, with poetry, with music, because you're dealing with a transcendence or reality that is beyond articulation. And for those of us who seek to rise up against this monstrous evil, culture is going to be as important as the more prosaic elements of resistance, such as a food tent or a medical tent or a communications tent.
Okay, so a little story here. The Greeks had a myth about a character named Procrustes. Any of you guys familiar with Procrustes? Yeah? So this will be redundant for you. But so Procrustes was a guy who was called a highwayman, I guess. He lived on a well-trod path, right? And he would offer travelers a place to stay at night, and depending on their size, he would offer them either a short bed or a tall bed. And if they didn't fit it, if they were too short for the bed, he would stretch them out. He would put them on the rack and stretch them out to fit the bed. Or if they were too long for the bed, then he would chop them into bits so that they fit the bed, right? I see this myth as a metaphor for a mode of mind that wants to look at the world purely mechanically and wants to see everything as something that the conscious will can dictate to and force it to fit what it wants it to be. It's an abstract way of being in the world. So, and I also want to argue that that mode of mind has essentially usurped every other mode and has become the dominant mode of seeing and being in our world. So, and I also want to argue that that is causing massive psychic rifts amongst all of us. And so even though our very souls are being ripped apart by the fantastic forces of mechanization, abstraction, alienization, nihilization, we must resist, especially artists. We must call on our deepest selves, our deepest wells of creativity to reclaim our humanity, even in the face of oblivion and futility, which I know we've all felt at times, right? So why fantasy? Because fantasy is not the reductive commercial genre. At least that's not how I'm using the term, right? That we've been trained by the mass media to assume that it is. I argue that fantasy is tied to wonder, and it's the daughter of wonder. It's a profoundly human and humanizing power of imagination which we should nurture and cherish. What other creature envisions impossible futures and makes them possible? As Blake said, what was once only imagined is now, or what is now proven was once only imagined, right? Everything that is here was something that was in all this, right? In some mind. It was some sort of fantasy first, right? And also, what kind of dreams do androids have after all? Why are we so fucking desperate to become machines, right? What do machines dream about? Do they dream of electric sheep? Are electric sheep more interesting than real living sheep? Maybe to Elon Musk. Not to me, for sure. Okay, so Fred has just arrived in this fantastic vision after having his very, very self completely ripped apart. And of course, even in the realm of the divine, there's bureaucracy everywhere, right? So he's got to walk through this hall of mundane, monotonous doorways till he finally arrives at this self-indulgent divinity party. So this character here in the throne, his name is Theodosius. And he's not cycloptic for no reason. Castrate yourself before us. Yes, excuse me. I meant to say prostate. What? Sorry, prostrate yourself before us. You must forgive me. English is my 2026th language. Look, my leg was bitten off by some kind of powerful creature, and I need it back. Is this really necessary? Ah, you have lost a limb, so technically you are incapable of prostration. This is acceptable. What? But we accept your incapacity. Let's move on. Move on indeed. Look at yourselves. Humanity is faced with the most ominous crises in its history. War is more widespread and destructive than ever before. There is more unnecessary misery than in all past ages combined. And here you sit in your tower, contemptuous and smug, gawking and twittering. Listen to yourself. It is not we who have abandoned humanity, but vice versa. We may be immortal, but we are bound by archaic laws, just as all life and energy. Humanity has systematically and scientifically degraded and devolved itself. If humans were merely under our control, they wouldn't be fit to be humans. But they are no more under our control when they choose to dehumanize themselves. That's beside the point. Just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you do nothing. What does it mean of divinity when it profanes itself? So then there's the guy here, the random effete god who's chilling with his bird, right? Why are you here? You called me here. Exactly. And is that nothing? We express our archaic dynamics through every true poet, every true prophet, every true sage, every true artist, every creator of values. As Isaiah told William Blake, the voice of honest indignation is the voice of God. Are we then to blame for a race blessed with the sacred gift of prophecy who ignores and debases that gift? Are we to blame for a race that obscures and deceives itself so obstinately that it cannot discern righteous indignation from self-righteous aggrandizement? And then this race which has abandoned its call has the gall to claim it has been abandoned? Man endlessly digs a pit, then despairs at finding itself in an abyss. Where is Potemkin? A riddle. Forgive me. The cosmos is just too much at times. Flick. All right, so back to reality. Because while all these inner struggles are taking place in you as the artist, you still have to deal with real life, right? And at this time, around this time, I was not only married, but Mary and I were beginning a family. And yeah, real life keeps on erupting into new and novel unpredictabilities and impossible responsibilities. and pain and ecstasy. And then a child is born. So this is my first son, Augie. And when he was born, we had just moved down to Atlanta, and being that I am a starving artist and my wife is a well-paid lawyer, we decided that it made no sense for her to push her job aside, that I would do it, because the amount of money that I can make in teaching doesn't even pay for childcare. So I took, well, we didn't actually make a plan exactly, but I took some time off to take care of our son. And I spent about a year doing that. It was really, really intense. And towards the end of that year, I think about the end of the year, I came to Mary and said, "Oh man, I have not had one day in the studio for almost a year, and I am going insane." I actually got a lot of ideas. It was amazing, actually. I know at least a couple of you guys are parents. It was really incredible, the reconnection to that childhood energy and the wonder of childhood, right? And seeing the world again through a child's eyes, which I'm pretty good at anyway, but it's profoundly different suddenly with your kid, right? But that being said, at the end of that year, I was really feeling it. So we decided to get some help with childcare, and so that I could at least get a day or two in the studio here and there. So I got back to work, got back into the bowels of this beast. And then got shot out on the other side into another jungle. Because then we had our second son, Rennie. And Rennie was a tricky guy. Is a tricky guy. Rennie didn't sleep for a year and a half. He's asleep right now. But he did not sleep for a year and a half, and that caused some sleep deprivational insanity in our family. But I was still working, still pushing through, trying to get this thing done, and but not pushing too hard, right? You got to let it come at its own pace. So yeah, the Gordian Knot got tighter and tighter. This is another story I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with, but it's a classic. The Gordian Knot was this rope that was tied so convolutedly that nobody could untie it, and this was like the signal that Alexander the Great was destined to be the great, right? As he came and he was challenged to undo the Gordian Knot, and he looked at it, and he took out his sword, and he just chopped through it, and it was like, oh, right? Nobody ever thought of it that way. We had let ourselves get sucked into the rules, and it took that outside perspective to come in and be like, flash of insight, dude, I don't have to play by your rules, right? So he just severed the knot. Well, for me, when I was actually working on this piece, this was Thanksgiving of 2014. I was working on this one, and this one was feeling really good to me. I still love this image, but I didn't split the knot. I split my head. So I was working on this piece. I was at a friend's house in Lexington during Thanksgiving. I was visiting him for a tennis tournament that he and I were playing together. And I was at his house alone. He had already gone for Thanksgiving, and I was going downstairs to work on this drawing. And I kind of was all happy and excited and came down the stairs. And as it was kind of like this, walking down these stairs and just kind of pitched forward a little bit. and there's the overhang of the wall, basically, and just bam, hit my head right there, fell to the floor, and was immediately, that it hurt so bad I knew I'm bleeding. I have to be bleeding. So I basically drugged myself to the bathroom and looked into the mirror, pulled my hair up, and it was just gushing. And I thought, oh, shit, I've got to go to the hospital. Because I don't know how many of you guys have had head injuries before, but head injuries don't seal up. I've had one before and just left it for a few days and went to the doctor finally because it wouldn't close. And he said, yeah, you should have come here when this happened. So I drove myself to the hospital and got stitched up. And then I plunged back in. So plunge, Russell. Shit. So Fred is now getting to the point where frustration is starting to set in, and he's not hearing it as an orchestra anymore. And is everything sentient here? Did that creature just wink at me? Okay, step back. Breathe deep. Clear away. So another story. This has been translated into multiple cultures. I think even Beckett wrote a version of it, but it originally comes from an Islamic tradition about the mullah Nasruddin. So Nasruddin is walking home one night, and he's drunk. And he drops his keys, and he searches around and just can't find them. And he goes over to the lamppost, and he's looking around, and a police officer walks. It wouldn't have been a police officer because there were no such thing as police officers when these stories were told, but a police officer walks up, and he says, Mullah Nasruddin, what are you doing? What are you looking for? And he says, I dropped my keys. I can't find them anywhere. And he said, well, where did you drop them? And Nasruddin points out, he says, somewhere over there. And he says, well, why are you looking here? And Nasruddin says, because this is where the light is. And I think there are a lot of different ways to interpret that story, which I think any good story can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. I interpret it similarly to what I was discussing about our calling as artists. And just as human beings, I don't think you need to be an artist for creativity to transform your life. But I interpret it as the danger of the potential delusionality that consciousness can cause, right? Because we really champion consciousness, and it's obviously a powerful thing, and the light is important. But the problem, when there's the problem with it, is that it becomes really tricky, right? And it has us looking at the light and thinking everything to be found is in the light, because that's where the light is, right? And so I think, again, obviously I'm an advocate for the arts in general for everybody, but I think we who feel some sort of calling to the arts have to search around in the dark. We have to grasp about in places where we can't see. We can't allow ourselves to be deluded and misaimed by our eyes, right? So, transformation is complete. Fred got his leg back. Well, he didn't get his leg back. He got a new leg. He united with divinity. And at this point, this is basically the end of the book. And I finished this in, let's see, this is 2019, I finished in about late 2016, early 2017. Excuse me. And so then, again, back to reality, right? This is the world we live in. Making the book, producing the thing, getting it out there. How do we do that, right? I am very much aware that the work that I'm making is not aiming. It's not. I don't want to say it doesn't have a mass audience. Maybe it does. That's not really up for me to decide. But I don't. It's not aimed at a mass audience, right? Like it's not. I'm not trying to make mass palatable entertainment. So I thought, okay, you know what? I sent some books out to different publishers just in case, because I've done the self-publishing route before, and I love it for the control that it gives me, because I feel like if I'm going to work my ass off on something this long, then I want it to be the way I want it to be, right? But I thought, if I can get somebody to publish it the way I want it to be published, then that would be great. I couldn't, so I decided that I would give Kickstarter a try. And that worked out on many levels that I could not have foreseen. But this quote was one of my favorites. I used it. This is from Gary Groth, who none of you guys probably have ever heard of, but if you're in the indie comics world, he's a really important guy. He founded one of the, I would say, one of the best independent comics publishers in the world, called Fantagraphics, and he and I are actually friends. I sent him the book, and I sent it to him, and I got back a few months later. I was like, "Hey, did you ever get that book?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, do you have any interest in publishing it?" And he was like, "Oh, you wanted us to publish it?" He's like, "I thought you were just sending it to me." And then he said, I really admire your work, but it falls between the cracks of just about everything marketable in a targetable way." And I thought that was amazing. And you know, one of my oldest friends, he told me that his wife saw this whenever I did the Kickstarter, and she felt really sad for me. and I was like, "No, dude, that is amazing. That's one of my favorite quotes ever." He was like, "Yeah, I know. She just doesn't understand." So one of the ways, actually, that doing this Kickstarter project really transformed my thinking, I've noticed this reverberation effect since doing it, is that I realized that even as critical as I am and have been for a long time of consumer culture and mass-produced stuff, even though, of course, I love tons of popular entertainment, of course. But as critical as I have been of it, there was still some part of me that was constantly kind of thinking about and hoping for some sort of mass audience, you know? And doing this helped me realize that actually I don't need that, and I don't even necessarily want it. I want to have an audience who cares enough about my work to want to see it, and hopefully reach people who are open to being transformed by art, as I am. You know, I'm sure most of you guys are, right? Like when I look at art, great art, bad art, it transforms me, you know, especially great art. But even bad art, a lot of times I look at it and I'm like, it's transformative in the sense that because I can't help but be thinking about ways to do things, I look at the potential it could have had. And I think, well, this didn't achieve that potential, so I'll take it and do it my way, right? So the point being with the Kickstarter thing, what that really opened up for me was a much more powerful, concrete appreciation for the fact that I really don't need a lot of people to see my work. I need enough people to help me make it. And if I have that, then that's cool, right? And I got this made, and that's kind of enough for me. So this was the poster for the release party, which was in December. And I know that it's not necessarily smiled upon for artists to actually like their work, but I really actually love my work, you know? I look at this piece and it makes me really happy. It feels like it's like vibrating, and I like that, you know? So yeah. So then so then getting the work out there, right? That's obviously an issue. It's one of the reasons I really, in some ways, want to deal with a publisher, because distribution and promotion is really difficult, and it's not the thing I want to spend my time doing, really. I want to be making art, but I think, you know, it's also rewarding in its own ways. So, you know, I go around and get the book out there, and then, of course, also, I'm talking about this because this is my most recent project, but I'm working on a bunch of different things, and I just thought tonight I'd share a couple of some other stuff that I'm working on. I've got a project going right now that I call Venom Myths, that is going to be a self-anthology of comics and kind of, you know, it's funny because Elliot's introduction really hit home with me. I feel like in some ways maybe he penetrated into something more than I really kind of expected, honestly. And I think that I personally have struggled with religion in the past, you know? And I was raised as a Christian, and I kind of revolted against that at a certain point, and it's taken me a long time to realize that in some ways I think I am actually making religious art, and in some ways I'm not sure that there's actually a difference if we're talking about not religion as a kind of institution, but as a transformatively human thing. I think that as Chris Hedges, are any of you guys familiar with Chris Hedges? No? So the guy, so the first video that I showed was Madeleine L'Engle. I don't know if you guys, some of you guys probably have read A Wrinkle in Time, right? I actually never have read it all the way through, but I've watched some of her lectures, and I think she's a pretty brilliant artist. Chris Hedges is a journalist who spends an inordinate amount of time exposing, in a very profoundly moral way, exposing the lies that we're often being fed in every outlet imaginable. Anyway, he said in there that religion and art have kind of always been fused, you know? And I've started realizing I think that is the case, and I still hesitate to say it because I know how is déclassé, is that the right term? I know how uncool it is to talk about that kind of stuff in the academic world, and maybe especially in the art world. I just think that in some ways we as artists have been sold a false bill of goods, and we need to reclaim our goddamn birthright and make some shit that transforms people, or at least transforms ourselves, right? So, yeah, this is a project I'm working on right now. In this particular scene, this was inspired. There's a bigger story, but this particular scene was inspired by a story my mom told me about a dog that got run over, her brother's dog, and how she walked out and it had been backed over by her cousin, and he didn't know it. He had just driven off. And she walked out, and the dog was lying there with its legs broken, whimpering and bleeding. And she told me about how painful it was to sit there and hold the dog in its last breaths. And that really hit me pretty profoundly. And I thought I've got to figure out a way to try to express that in narrative form. So the scene here is basically that these guys, these are kind of my main characters right now, Thorsten, Hashem, and Nick, and they are they've been captured by this really brutal alien race, basically of basically barbarians, right? They've captured them and have enslaved them, and during that time, Hashem has made good friends with this canine race of aliens, and one of them gets beaten up by the brutes, and he's deeply feeling it, and when he's finally pushed, he cannot hold back his rage anymore, and unleashes himself on the enslavers. Okay, so we made it through, and there's just this is Fred coming out of the creature that ate him, and this is the last thing. This actually, I found this pretty profound. As I was working on the book, it was kind of like a guiding light, because I had a student at Pratt. I was when we were in New York, I was teaching at Pratt and Cooper, and I had a student who was also working on comics, and we had an independent study together, and he was into a lot of similar things that I was into, and one day he knew about this story that I was working on, and one day he sent me this text, and he said, I think this is what Severed Limbs is about. And so it goes, so this is from Hegel, the philosopher Hegel, from the 18th century, late 1700s, right? He says, but the life of the spirit is not the life that shrinks from death and keeps itself untouched by devastation, but rather the life that endures it and maintains itself in it. It wins its truth only when, in utter dismemberment, it finds itself. It is this power, not as something positive, which closes its eyes to the negative. On the contrary, spirit is this power only by looking the negative in the face and tarrying with it. This tarrying with the negative is the magical power that converts it into being. That's my spiel.